Welcome to PR on the Record, the podcast that explores the role of PR in shaping success within the global tech ecosystem. I'm Shani Ben Haim.
And I'm Ariel Shapiro. Today, Eytan Buchman, the CMO of Freightos, is joining us. Originally from Chicago, Eytan has been at the intersection of storytelling and digital amplification for well over a decade in industries ranging from the military to high-tech. With a background in strategic communication and PR, Eytan is currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Freightos, a digital freight booking platform. In this role, he led marketing from when the company had less than 10 employees to its current guise as a NASDAQ-traded global platform that in some countries handles over 20% of cargo in its scope. His claim to fame is being called a freight nerd by the New York Times.
We'll be diving into Eytan's data-driven approach to PR, the true definition of high-value media placements, and his perspective on how PR evolves throughout a company's journey from fundraising to sustaining relationships after the hype fades. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Eytan. Thank you for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time out to have this conversation with us.
Hey, I'm pumped to be here. Thanks for having me, Shani and Ariel.
So we gave a little bit of an introduction to you, and you've been at Freightos since the beginning. I guess if you could start by sharing a little bit about your role and how PR has evolved within the company from its early stage fundraising stage to the later stage brand building.
Yeah, oh my God, that's a super broad question, and I like it. It leaves me a lot of space to play. So yeah, Eytan Buchman, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Freightos. Literally started in our founder's basement back in 2013, and just like a dinosaur at the company. Freightos, just as a whole, right, in general, is a global freight booking platform. We connect airlines, ocean liners with freight companies, and those freight companies with importers. And by nature, it means that we just work with a berserk number of segments. So we'll work with nearly every single player that touches physical goods from a business perspective. And that just creates like a really, really like large target audience. And my goal is really to make sure that we touch the different parts of our buyer segments at the right place at the right time. So for smaller businesses, that could be general brand visibility and then shepherding them all the way through the acquisition process, getting them to start using the platform, and then even the customer engagement and retention afterwards. For the larger business, it's your more typical kind of like B to large B, so sales enablement, demand gen, and then across the board running executive and corporate marketing. So I'm on the board of the company. We're publicly traded, so that has its own little headaches, and certainly from a PR perspective, comes with its own little PR tax. And yeah, I kind of run the entire thing, and it's so fun because it means that I can, on any given day, jump into one specific area and then spend the other part of the day just working on something that feels like almost a totally different company. So it's kind of me on like a very high level in terms of my role. In terms of how PR has evolved, I think PR, it's a lever, right? It's just like it's a lever that you can pull, and it's really a means to an end, and that end, like any part of a company, the end changes every single day. And maybe on day one, the goal of visibility is just be like, hey, we're an actual entity. Like we're not just like a website that somebody threw up on WordPress. And then maybe it'll evolve over time to, hey, we got to fundraise, and that means I need to be in VentureBeat or TechCrunch. And then the next day, it's I actually need to be in front of my target audience who are going to be buying. And I don't know, I have a very memorable conversation that I had with one of our lead investors, must have been like 8 years ago, where I said like, hey, we don't want a TechCrunch publication. Those are totally useless for us right now. We just want to be in American Shipper or Journal of Commerce, or these like very, very kind of obscure logistics publications. And then over time, it moves into brand marketing, different acquisition for different types of users. And each one is a totally different beast. And of course, we've gone through the gamut of me running this myself, having somebody in-house, working with PR agencies, just kind of going through all the different iterations.
That's amazing. So it's been a pretty, I guess you could say, like dynamic experience in terms of all the different stages of the company, and really because of the diversity of the product and who you guys cater to as well. There's all those different segments and all those areas that you're going to and all the different needs as well at those times. It's it all goes into the strategy building and also the outreach in terms of PR and how you're getting connected to different media outlets. You spoke a little bit about focusing on vertical and trade-specific media outlets. I've heard you speak before and really advocate to the power of those verticals. Why do you believe that they're sometimes more powerful, I guess, than the mainstream tech publications? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but if you can expand on that.
Yeah, I actually think that the reason that I shifted at the time, 8 years ago, is actually totally different than why I would shift today. And I think today we are at this, I think this stage in PR and customer engagement and in user engagement that we have never been in terms of information consumption as individuals, as employees, as companies, whatever it is, where suddenly words are cheap, right? And so ridiculously cheap. Like I think that if you go from like Gutenberg all the way down to like the creation of the computer and now suddenly AI, suddenly content at scale, infinite content is infinitely cheap and anybody can do it. And there's just a ton of regurgitated drivel everywhere. And that makes it so much harder to cut through the noise and actually get in front of the right people. And I think the thing that has emerged as the most important, besides the regular baseline of am I driving value, is getting the right channel. And in order to select the right channel, I think it comes down to credibility and authenticity, right? And there's some organizations or some media publications that have inherited credibility that is just sticking with them, right? New York Times, you read something in the New York Times, you might contest it. There might be people that say like, hey, I don't agree with this guy's take, fake news, whatever. But no matter what, there's an inherent credibility of like that pickup in the New York Times. The more you go into B2B, and I think the thing that accompanies us as B2B marketers is always that we're selling to people that know more about any given product than we will ever know. They know that the logistics folks that I sell to, they will forget more in logistics in a week than I will ever learn in my entire life. And that means I need to find who do they trust and where do they consume their information, particularly when everybody has these kind of like lasers up to protect themselves from this overwhelming again, regurgitation of information. And for a large part, those are the trade publications, but it really requires very, very careful cultivation of relationships and really going through each publication one at a time and understanding which one can bang out the numbers and say, look, I have 45,000 opens, and which one have 200 opens from the right people and are trusted by people within the organization. And like always, I think that the best way to get that is directly by speaking to your customers and understanding what do they read, where are they getting their information, and working with professionals that have worked in that vertical before.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's so important to be in front of the right audience as opposed to an audience. And you mentioned before, you're talking about essentially research and making sure that you know who your audience or what your audience is reading. And I know that you're also an advocate for data-driven approaches, which is essentially what that is. But could you just walk us through how you use, internal and third-party data, which is, I suppose, related to that in some way, to shape your story?
Yeah, I think I initially got to really leaning on data as a form of pitching and as a form of trying to find the right story by working backwards from what do the customers want to hear and what do the customers trust, right? Even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and to give your time up to read something. I can think of like there are literally times where there are publications about Freightos or that use our data that I just can't even bring myself to read because it's so boring and there's so many things that we want to read, right? So, and if I'm not going to read about myself and my own company on a hit that we manufactured, or I might not read the entire thing just because a data point is there. Obviously, the people that I'm selling to are not going to read everything, right? We have our guards up, and in order to get somebody to read, you need to introduce something radically different and radically new. And for the most part, it is very difficult to do that by introducing a new perspective. Unless you are Sam Altman or somebody who has incredible recognition within the industry, nobody cares about your perspectives, right? Nobody cares about your spiky views and your contrarian views. And no, I think that if we throw AI at this problem, it'll be really, really cool. Like nobody cares. And you need to figure out what do people actually care about. And even now, like understanding their problem and really showing empathy, nobody cares about that either. Like you need to find a way to beat down the door and for them to say, yes, I need to know this. And right, you need to win them every single line of every single article. And what kind of the penny that dropped for me is one of the best ways to do that is show them something about their own industry, about their colleagues, about their peers, about their competitors that they don't know right now, because that's usually what people are most interested in. They want to know, what are their customers doing? What are their peers doing? What are their colleagues doing? What are best practices? What are worst practices? And data is a great way to paint that picture and to do it in a way that really just oozes credibility and oozes like, hey, we know what we're talking about. When I think about graphs and when I think about charts, there's always this concept that I go back to in my mind where when you read a chart, I don't know if this was the same 50 years ago, but we're all a little bit more data savvy and we all know how to read charts and we all know how to read graphs. And, I think, you can tell this like great emotional story about somebody who starts smoking cigarettes and then quits smoking cigarettes and then starts smoking cigarettes again. And then when it gets lung cancer or something. But there's this like very counterintuitive approach where if you think about, just visualize a chart that, the x-axis is how long the person lives or every day, and the y-axis is how many cigarettes they're smoking. And just imagine, somewhere at around 12, you see that chart starting to go up a little bit when they're smoking in the backyard of school, and then it goes up a little bit more, and then I don't know, they go on some long trip in Vietnam when they're 19, and you see a crazy spike going up, and then they join medical school and they learn about the dangers, and you see that dropping, and then it comes back up when they're close to their finals, and then they get married and it drops down because the person wants to stay healthy, and then they get divorced and it goes up again. And you can just chart this whole thing until, the person gets lung cancer and dies, and it just like drops to zero. And there's something about when we read that chart, you have to first understand the data, and then you have to tell the story to yourself. And instead of somebody else telling you that story, you're assimilating it. You're telling that story to yourself. And even though it's so dry and it's just numbers, I think it's actually a new way to get to people in this day and age that just tells a totally different story and lets people run their own interpretations. So maybe I'm like just a huge, massive geek, and I just like get more enamored by like a chart about smoking than the person's actual story. But I think it's a radically different way to engage with people in the B2B space in a way that they're used to engaging, in a way that they really trust. And that just got me. And I think there's a million different ways to cut it and a million different ways to do it. But that idea that data can tell an incredibly powerful story if you tell the story right is just a very, very powerful tool that helps you zig when other people are zagging.
For sure, I hear that. It definitely does sound powerful. It's also refreshing, as you say, because there's so much data to consume now. So you really have to find the story, or in this case, you say the data that really does cut through. And I'm sure during your career, you've seen how marketers and founders can kind of get that story wrong. I suppose, they kind of keep pushing the message that they want instead of the message that people want to hear or want to see. Do you have any kind of anecdote stories or experiences about, when it goes wrong, essentially?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll say, I think it's Anna forgetting which story, the Tolstoy story about how, all happy families are happy for the same reason, all sad families are sad for different reasons. And I think there's a million ways that things can go wrong. When it goes right, and I'll start with that so we can have the negative, the mirror image. When it goes right, you find a relevant piece of information that communicates a story that people are trying to tell anyway and hits them correctly. Right now, we're in the middle of global tariff apocalypse. We pushed out a survey to 200 customers, small businesses, to ask them how tariffs are hitting them and how that's impacting their business as small businesses that are importing. We got responses from we sent it out to far more people. We got responses from 200 people. And those responses had some qualitative and some quantitative. We had, of the 200 people, the vast majority, 80%, said that it could have very, very significant or higher impact on their business. The median number, so the most people said it was 10 out of 10 in terms of how damaging could be for the business. And the qualitative responses there say things like, hey, my business is going to tank. I built this business up over 34 years and it's no longer viable. If the clock strikes 12 and these tariffs aren't revoked, then my business is gone and I turn into a pumpkin. And these like very, very real stories. And we got the survey, we sent it out. It's been in Financial Times, CBS, Wall Street Journal, everywhere. And it creates one of those snowballs where people come to you and keep on consuming the information. And that's an example of a very, very simple recipe that can go absolutely right. When it goes wrong, if you don't look at the data, I'm just talking about myself, or I have the hubris to think that a story that's important to me is important to everybody. And the only way that works is if you are a large enough entity that anything you do is important enough, right? So somebody at Google could fart and you could put out a press release about that, and suddenly everybody loves that, and you're going to get a pickup in TechCrunch about a shifted, moving from serif to sans serif on a logo for a company like that. But a company that is a founder's and that's all they see every single day, they're going to assume far more importance to their trends and to what, their values and what they believe than anything else. And getting a feature pickup about a product that you release is close to impossible unless there's something that literally has tectonic shockwaves for the industry as a whole. Right. And that's, I think, the first place where it goes wrong is just total miscalibration of like what matters to other people versus what matters to you. And you can't overcompensate, and just like, it matters to me so much that I need to get something around it. Now you can go the other direction, which is you can get a great pickup about something that matters to everybody, but if it doesn't matter enough to the company, then that's also worthless. Right. And that's, I think, the other direction where like we are not, certainly within an organization, you don't get paid for pickups, right? They're vanity metrics at best, unless they're actually serving a purpose. And I think you can go wrong by ignoring PR as a channel, but you can just as equally go wrong as turning PR into a means unto itself, rather than just like totally, saying like, hey, you find the right balance, find where it matters, find how it impacts you, and then keep on going from there.
That's a really great story and a really great example of how essentially like we need to create the strategies that really get that bottom line impact, and really zooming out and looking at what are the people that we're serving, how are they affected by different things that are happening in the world, and how can we connect our story to that in a way where it's not like hey, look at me, I'm here, but really becoming, I always say with the clients that I work with, you want to become a part of the industry conversation. You don't want to be the person that people are talking about.
Right.
That's something different, because it really does create more of an impact when you're a part of the larger conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say just to that really quickly is that it's a really fine balance. And I don't think there's ever a right answer, but if you think about these folks like Bezos' 2 pizza rule for meetings, or Zapier canceling all their meetings, right? Or just like these, like Tobias Lutke from Shopify saying like, hey, everybody needs to use AI. I don't know where to draw the line between, I'm part of the conversation, this is going to help me, or not. Sometimes it might be for employer brand. I think that there is value in doing that. I think articulating it is really difficult. And if you're an early stage startup, it's even more difficult, because like, go figure how much that's worth, how much, the cascading variables, just the backlinks, right? From a pure SEO perspective, the fact that 5 people might see it. I just know that in my experience, it's much easier to go wrong, go big, get a lot of coverage, but have that do nothing to your bottom line, or be associated with some silly little anecdote that was helpful for you from like a PR blip and maybe justified a PR agency's salary for a month or 2 months, but just like doesn't really do something for your business. And if anything, was a distraction. So
with that being said, do you think that there's still value in those big name press hits for companies, or is that attention often fleeting or over prioritized?
I would say I would put PR into the same bucket as content in general, and just say that you can have a range, you can have a lot of different things, but really what I look for is finding that right Venn diagram overlap between, is this interesting and relevant for my audience, and does this serve my business needs? And the closer you are to the center of that Venn diagram, the better off you are, and the more money the more you want to spend. And the closer you go to the edges, it doesn't mean you don't do it, but it means that you like make sure and you really guard your time and make sure that if you're doing it deliberately and you're doing it intentionally, and you know exactly what you're getting into.
And on the opposite end, for founders that are unfamiliar with the trade media, how would you explain the long-term value of those press placements?
I think there's a lot of different ways that you can use a trade pickup. The first thing is pure top of funnel brand familiarity, right? Just like people just seeing your name and seeing you being part of the conversation. And I think also understanding the economics or the data behind it, and understanding you're probably not going to see a massive spike of traffic on your website. If you take the largest trade publications in the world and you get a massive pickup from them, you're not going to get TechCrunch, right? You'll see 500 people, 1,000 people visit your website, attributable, maybe, probably not, right? What you'll start to see, I think where you start to see that win is when you're having a customer conversation and they're like, oh, by the way, I saw you in X, Y, or Z. And when you go online and you see 4 people shared that article on LinkedIn, and those are just little, it's kind of like, you planted the seed and you walk around and you start to see these little like offshoots pop up through the ground, and there's so much more going under the surface that you don't see. And you just need to keep on doing that, and you need to keep on being there and be very, very selective. Like I don't think that going after every trade publication matters. I also think that sometimes people get caught in a bad loop where it's, once you find the one trade publication that'll pick you up, is keep on going after the person, and you get diminishing returns when you start hitting the same exact publication. So I think finding the right balance of where are my readers, trying to cast a wider net to make sure that you're distributing your focus and your attention, which is, I think, the rarity when you're a founder, when you're a small business, that you're focusing it, you're spreading it equally. And of course, if you're working with like a PR agency, making sure that you are working really closely with them in order to identify the right stories and identify what actually matters. I think the best PR professionals that I work with, agencies or in-house, are ones that end up kind of making you spend more time, not less time, right? So if you're working with an agency and they're going off and they're coming up with their own stories and pitching them, that might be great from an attention perspective, but in terms of the actual content, they will never know your industry as well as you know, right? And they're not having the conversations with the customers. And like, you need to invest and you need to understand, you really need to be inquisitive. It's hard to build product market fit. It's also really hard to build like message or story market fit. And you need to work really like hand in hand in order to make sure that you nail that correctly. But over time, once you do that, you'll start to see those shoots from a brand visibility perspective, from an SEO perspective, from people reaching out to you for those conversations, from walking around at a trade show and running into the reporter, and that fostering, interest in another larger piece, and they just gather steam. And over time, they really accrue into a very powerful channel for the most part.
I appreciate that you said that, it really is working hand in hand, because Ariel and I work with different clients across different industries. And it really is I always say when I speak to people that are interested in doing PR for their businesses, this is a collaboration. This is in no way something to outsource because you don't have the bandwidth for it. You need to put the time aside to really collaborate on this process. Otherwise, it won't be impactful for you and what you're trying to achieve. So I appreciate that you mentioned that. And I'll let Ariel now get his word in.
Yeah, no, I was also going to pick up on that. It really is a collaboration. I also just wanted to drill down into those, the shoots that you were talking about, because I think what you were touching upon there was essentially we have our news cycle, if you want to call it that. You've got your company news, but then there'll be times when there's nothing really happening in the company. You might be working on something, you might be trying to launch a product, whatever, but it's like a quiet time in terms of news. So what do you do in those times? What strategies do you use to kind of get get Freightos, in this case, in front of news reporters when there's no breaking news as such?
So we have a background motion that we've been running for years already, which started kind of like snowballed from initial validation with reporters, which is we did an internal audit and we figured out what is information that we have that is unique, that to some extent is exhaust data. It's not things that we're using or we're monetizing, but could be interesting. We're, as I said before, a global freight booking platform. So that means we're sitting on a lot of prices of what is the average freight cost in different lanes. And that one kind of fell in our lap. But I have spoken to dozens of companies about the strategy, and almost every single one, when you sit down and do a little bit of an audit, you can come up with the right internal data. And we started by sending out a weekly email or bi-weekly email to reporters saying, hey, here's how prices are changing on this core lane. At the time, there was very little aggregated data around freight prices, and even if there was, people were monetizing it and selling it at crazy high prices. So we were able to give that away for free and drive interest. Over time, that evolved into a weekly email. Over time, that evolved into a self-service website. Over time, that evolved into a total standalone website that we were able to monetize and does 7-figure revenue, but is still, I think, probably by a very, very significant margin, one of the best sources for where organizations and publications get data. So we now have this motion where, purely from an SEO perspective, we have so many publications that have cited our data and backlinked to us, and we've invested in so much of an SEO perspective, and also have very, very unique information. So at the beginning of COVID, we were positioned to the fact that when people started to talk about supply chain, everybody found us. And the White House, the press secretary from the White House was getting up on the podium and dropping Freightos data hits. And we were getting every single day, we averaged literally every single day a mainstream media publication. And you get this snowball effect where they come to your data, they ask for more information, you throw them onto your list, you send out a weekly email that provides useful information, and then they reach out to you. And when something happens, we will get, for the most part, on most days when there's news, and around tariffs, for example, there's always news, we will get inbounds from the largest publications in the world leaning on that data. And there's always information. There's always things that are happening, to your point, Ariel. Like there's always something happening in the world. And you need to figure out how far away from your comfort zone, how far away from your product you want to get. But like, I mean, I don't know, just like two examples that come to mind very, very easily. One of the COP climate change conferences, we had nothing to talk about. We didn't have any products that were related to emissions. We went online. I think we used Google Scholar or somebody's university account, JSTOR or whatever it is. We found 5 different publications, 5 different journal academic articles that talked about carbon emissions from the logistics industry, did like a mini meta-analysis about what the average was or whatever it is, or kind of range, pitched it out to the Wall Street Journal logistics reporter who was at COP21, and they led their piece with that data point that we fed. Another example, when everybody in the industry was talking about Amazon and whether Amazon would get into supply chain, I think every industry has gone through that process of like, hey, what if Amazon comes? So we hired somebody on Upwork to scrape the Amazon career site, got them to run a quick analysis about different job requirements and different job titles that Amazon was hiring for in the logistics and supply chain space, and put together a piece about that. Like in retrospect, yeah, that was like fodder for publications, but had nothing to do with our business. So it was like a fairly stupid thing to do in retrospect. But I think what matters is like there is so many things that are always happening, and if anything, that's accelerated. And there's so much data that lives internally or externally that I kind of find like it's like sometimes lazy just not to think about it.
It's amazing though that you're like, okay, the story maybe had nothing to do with what we're trying to achieve or what we're trying to do, but that also probably created additional potentially inbound opportunities if different journalists are looking at that as well. That might lead to some sort of interest to eventually get to the story where it did hit the target that you were looking for. It's just amazing that you speak about it from years of experience, because it took time to build up those inbound opportunities coming your way, and the way that you've built that. And that's something that we talk about often in PR, is that it's a long tail game. So that's something that, we advocate for. And when we say, and when you get, the early stage startups that want to do the quick and dirty, PR hits and stuff like that, it really goes to show that with Freightos, starting from that basement to, becoming a public company on the NASDAQ, really how much strategy and work you put into to get those inbound opportunities coming through. It's a great example of that.
It doesn't always work for everybody. And, I think that you can invest a lot of time and not have it land. And I don't want to like retroactively create a story where like, this is all you need to do. And right, 1, 2, 3, poof, you're done. But I think what does matter though, is like, you need to figure out what do you know internally that other people don't know? Mm-hmm. And how do you share that in a way that just like seeps credibility and authenticity and education? And I think that's the hardest part to do in this entire story, like really honing in on the right audience and the right story that fits for that audience and the right conduit to get to the audience. I've
related PR a lot to puzzle, and there's all these different pieces that need to fit together in order for the whole picture to come together, and that's that in a nutshell.
I'm going to dive in here because I know Eytan, you mentioned about you sent data to reporters who are at COP, for example, and Shani and I get asked this, I think, pretty much every time we speak to someone who isn't in PR about, you must know a lot of journalists and stuff. So I just wanted to kind of pick up on that and ask, was that a journalist that you knew? And do you have any tips potentially for building those relationships with reporters?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think that's also evolved a lot. I tend to think that the importance of the relationship with reporters has probably declined actually over time, or maybe to be a little bit more nuanced, it's become like an uneven barbell where the real heavy hitter reporters, in order to get in with an Anderson Cooper, in order to get in with Martha Stewart, like with the real heavy hitters, or even on a let's expand it and talk like new PR, right? The Substack, if you want to get in with Lenny Rajitsky, like from a product perspective, or if you want to get to a Bill Rogan, like those are going to be relationship based, and they just need to be like incredible relationship based. So your highest leverage opportunities are really going to require a very, very tight relationship. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of that, the very, very long tail are either people that move around a lot and, one day they're covering logistics and another trade and then they're moving on to some strange beat, or people that are just so slammed. And I think if you try to commiserate with a reporter right now, the deadlines that they're under and what they're, supposed to be shipping on and the number of data points they're supposed to be picking up and the fact checking they're supposed to do, I think it's just impossible. And a lot of them, it's become more transactional because their requirements from their job have become more transactional. Mm. So I think that those ones, like, it really is much more of like, hey, what do you have to give me? And hey, I can give it to you really, really quickly. And I've always been a little bit impressed by how easy it is to succeed, just like reaching out to people. Like, I don't, I think if you have the right story and you're able to find the right person, be like, look, you write about these 5 things, you know more about this than anyone else in the world. Here's 3 things that I think matter to you and what I think this can turn into a story. I don't know if this is relevant right now, but just wanted to share that with you. Happy to share a quick 5-minute, video recording walking through it if you don't have time. But here's, in the meantime, 3 charts, 2 data points, and a quick, quote from our CEO, and just give them the story. And they don't necessarily need that relationship, but over time, those little transactional, hey, you really helped me out with this, turn into something really, 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 much, much more significant. So I think relationships matter. Relationships will always matter, but I think you can also get by without building relationships. The one exception that I would layer on that very, very heavily is the closer somebody is to the exact product or space that you are trying to cover. Trade publications, we talked about this before. If there are, let's say, I don't know, let's come up with like stupid numbers, like 20 trade publications, of which 5 of them are actually relevant, but of which 2 of them actually have in-house tech editors that are the people that are asked to speak at events and actually know what is going on in the industry and have been in the space for 15 years and command trust. Build a relationship with those people and don't outsource that relationship either. Like, I would advocate, give that relationship and build that relationship up deliberately with the CEO. When something happens, don't even have the head of marketing, don't have the PR agency pitch that person, have the CEO drop a quick note to that person and say, hey, just want to let you know this just happened, happy to jump on a call, and just like hold on to that so tight, because those high leverage opportunities, like you build that relationship once and it's going to feed you forever. So I think it's not a nuance. It's not like a, hey, relationships matter or they don't matter. It's that it's worthwhile investing in some relationships, but not all of them.
I really appreciate those insights on relationship building with the media, and especially, we've seen the media industry change just, in the years that you've been at Freightos. I'm sure that opinion has also changed and that's evolved over time. Because we're seeing the media landscape continue to also shift, what trends, aside from data-driven reporting and inserting data into stories, what other trends are you keeping an eye out on that might reshape PR in the next few years?
I think I have a much less concrete definition of what is a reporter, right, and what is a publication. I think for me, like, why did publications ever matter? Publications mattered because they were a single focal point that give you access to a broader target audience. And now there's a lot of different companies or a lot of different people that do that. And it might be a micro influencer, and the pickup from a guy that sends out a weekly email to 60 people can be far more outsized than anything else. And so I think that definition has definitely shifted a lot and requires more industry expertise, more awareness of where people are reading, more conversations with your customers to understand what matters, less sometimes of a focus on like KPIs, like total readership, total reach, weekly, whatever. Maybe looking a little bit more at metrics like newsletter subscribers, open rates, SEO equity, number of followers on LinkedIn. So I think that's one shift that's been interesting to track. I think another thing is just like really the importance of building up your own audience, and starting to almost think of things like you're your own reporter. We've built out over the past 6 years a crazy following, like probably close to 100,000 people that read our weekly email that we send out about freight space, and a big chunk of that are reporters that then source information from us as well. So I think recognizing that there are high leverage people that you can reach out to, but making sure that over time you are oriented towards getting people back into your own ecosystem, because you never know when a media publication will slam the brakes on you, or when SEO will start to fade away, or when ChatGPT will start stealing traffic. So I'd say definitely nebulous, a less concrete idea of what a reporter is, trying to make sure that you're almost kind of your own media publication. I think authenticity is something that's more important than it was before, because it's so much more lacking right now. So trying to figure out how do you build up personal relationships with your readers, and that could be mediated or not mediated. Like being able to tell a real story to a reporter so that the reporter picks it up. You got to build a connection, and that's a really helpful way to do that. And then maybe more broadly speaking, making sure that you can really educate like you never have before. Right? It's just like so. I think reporters are under the gun to deliver really, really, really good reporting. right? So you have some reporters that are just like going through the motions and filing stories, and those are stuff that ChatGPT will take over very, very quickly. And then you have people that are really putting in like more in-depth articles. And those are the articles that people will read and you want to be part of. So I think it's being very, very careful about where you're investing a lot of your time, rather than just like spreading yourself thin and hoping that one thing pans out.
Yeah, completely. I mean, quality, I guess, over quantity at the end of the day. And as we're nearly out of time, I just before we come to the end here, I just wanted to get your thoughts on what advice would you give to companies, that could be startups or more established companies, if they're looking to build sustainable PR presence and really cut through the noise. What advice would you give them?
I mean, I would start with like where do you feel like you can actually drive value, and then give that idea or that concept to somebody that is going to really critique you hard. Or like, don't ask your mom if it's a good story, right? Ask somebody who's just like going to shit all over you and make sure that it's actually valuable. And there's a lot of ways to test that, right? You can put up a LinkedIn post with a contrarian perspective and see if you get engagement. You can include it in an email. You could talk about it at a conference. See what are the stories that work. See what connects with people. See, how you can relate that back to your own underlying product, but don't force that. And spend more time there. Like it's not a hey, here's a story, please pitch this out. We're using AI, please pitch this out. It's just, you need to be deeper. You need to spend more time being thoughtful and deliberate about what you're pitching out and what that story is. And I, would say these are things that you can validate yourself. This is like no employee that you ever hire is gonna immediately turn the magic on. No agency is gonna do that. I kind of always feel like a founder can think of his own story, can send it out to a couple of reporters, and just get at least some type of instinct of like, am I in the right direction? Is this something that I can do more of? And then find the right PR agency, find the right person that can pour fuel on the fire. But I think first you need to get those sparks, and you can validate those sparks the same way that you can validate a product with a landing page.
Thank you so much, Eytan, for your insights and your time and taking the time to speak with us. We really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure that the listeners will take a lot of value out of this conversation.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. This was fun.
That was our conversation with Eytan Buchman, CMO of Freightos. We really enjoyed this conversation and hope you did too.
As always, if you're a founder trying to get your startup noticed, a marketer looking to up your PR game, or just curious about the stories behind the headlines, we hope this conversation gave you more of an inside look.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you have any questions or suggestions on topics we should talk about, send us your thoughts at prontheRec@gmail.com. That's prontheRec@gmail.com. Thank you all for listening. And again, I'm Ariel.
And I'm Shani. This was PR on the Record, going off the record. See you next time.